It was one of those calm weekday nights when everything felt perfectly in place, at least on the surface. The aroma of roasted vegetables filled the kitchen as my husband hummed to himself, placing plates on the dining table with an ease that only comes with years of routine. The lights were dim just enough to create a cozy glow. I watched him for a moment, admiring the familiar way he moved. His shirt sleeves were rolled up neatly, his expression soft. Yet, despite how picture-perfect the moment seemed, I felt a dull ache somewhere deep inside, a quiet longing I couldn't quite define. He smiled as he caught me looking. "What?" "Nothing," I replied with a small laugh, shaking my head. "I'm just tired, I guess." But before he could respond, my phone buzzed on the countertop. I glanced at the screen and felt my breath hitch. It was her. The message was simple: "Hey, thinking about you. Let's have a girls' night soon. You deserve some fun." A familiar warmth spread through my chest, followed by the sharp edge of something unnameable. Guilt? Excitement? I wasn't sure. I quickly locked the phone and returned to my chair. "Everything okay?" my husband asked as he sat across from me, serving a generous portion of dinner onto my plate. I nodded, pushing a smile to my face. "Just my friend, suggesting we catch up." He chuckled, his fork scraping the plate as he took a bite. "That sounds like a good idea. You've been working so hard, you could use some fun." There was no suspicion in his voice, no shadow of doubt. But his words only deepened the knot in my stomach. I wondered if he ever noticed how carefully I chose my words these days, or how I stayed longer in front of the mirror before heading out the door. Later that evening, after the dishes had been cleared and the soft hum of the television filled the living room, I stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street. My phone buzzed again, a second message: "Tomorrow night? My place. Let's drink wine and laugh about life like we used to." A slow exhale escaped my lips. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself it was long overdue, just two old friends reconnecting. Still, as I typed "sounds perfect" and hit send, a part of me already knew this wasn't just another night in the city. The next day passed in a blur of mundane tasks and half-hearted conversations. By the time the sun began to dip below the skyline, I felt my nerves unraveling. Standing in front of my closet, I hesitated before choosing a soft knit dress that hugged me in all the right places but still felt casual enough to avoid suspicion. Underneath, I picked out lace, something that felt indulgent and secret. As I stood in front of the mirror, I noticed the faint glow on my cheeks, the way my heartbeat quickened. I dabbed on a hint of perfume, a scent she once said suited me perfectly. Her apartment was warm and inviting, the faint scent of vanilla candles drifting through the air. She greeted me with her usual bright smile and pulled me into a hug that lingered just long enough for my pulse to quicken. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, her eyes flickering with something unspoken. I laughed, brushing a hand through my hair as if to shake off the nerves. "Me too. It's been too long." We sank into her couch, the weight of the week slipping away with every sip of wine. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did, memories of our past adventures, confessions about mundane work frustrations, and the small triumphs that made us feel alive. But in the moments between laughter, when our eyes met and the silence settled, I felt something shift. Her gaze lingered, and I couldn't look away. "Do you ever feel like you're searching for something, even when everything is good?" she asked, her voice quieter now, like the words carried more weight than she intended. My throat tightened. "Yes." Her hand brushed against mine, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through me. In that small, intimate space, surrounded by the soft glow of lamps and the hum of the city outside, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast and uncharted. I could hear my husband's steady, familiar voice in my head, telling me I was being silly, that I had everything I ever wanted. But here, in this apartment, under her watchful gaze, I wasn't sure if that was enough anymore. And when her fingers intertwined with mine, I didn't pull away. The warmth of her hand in mine was both thrilling and terrifying. I felt the air shift between us, a subtle, almost imperceptible current that seemed to pull me forward. My mind raced with reasons to move, to laugh it off as a playful gesture. But instead, I sat there, caught between the comfort of her presence and the ache of something new and forbidden. She tilted her head slightly, studying me with those knowing eyes. "You've changed," she said softly. "I don't know how to explain it, but you seem different." I swallowed hard. "Maybe I am." Her lips curved into a soft smile, though her gaze didn't lose its intensity. "I like this version of you. She's freer." I let out a shaky breath and reached for my glass of wine, trying to ground myself. "Sometimes I don't even know who I am anymore," I admitted. "I go through the motions, work, home, dinner with my husband, and it's fine. But it feels like I'm living someone else's life." She shifted closer, and I felt the faint brush of her knee against mine. "You're not alone in that feeling," she whispered. "We all crave something real, something raw." My heart pounded in my chest. Her words peeled back a layer I didn't even know I had. I turned to face her fully, our knees touching now, neither of us pulling away. I could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing down between us, thick and undeniable. Her voice broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to let yourself feel again?" I stared at her, searching for the right thing to say, something logical, something safe. But the truth was clawing its way out of me. All the time. She reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. Her fingers were gentle but deliberate, lingering for a moment longer than they needed to. My breath caught in my throat and time seemed to slow. I could feel the hum of the city through the windows, but it was distant, like white noise in the background of something far more intimate. Then it happened, soft, tentative, but electric. Her lips brushed mine, testing the boundaries we both knew we were crossing. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was slow, deliberate, like she was savoring the moment. My mind screamed at me to stop, to pull away, to remember everything I was risking. But my body didn't listen. Instead, I leaned in, closing the gap between us. The kiss deepened, and for a moment, everything else fell away, the weight of expectations, the fear of consequences, even the image of my husband waiting at home. All that existed was her warmth, her breath, and the way my heart raced against my ribs. When we finally pulled back, the world seemed quieter somehow. Her face was inches from mine, her eyes wide but soft. "I've thought about that for so long," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I blinked, trying to process the gravity of what had just happened. "Me too," I confessed, surprised by the honesty in my own voice. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It felt like a fragile truce between who we were and who we wanted to be. She reached for my hand again, her thumb tracing small, absent-minded circles against my skin. "Stay a little longer?" she asked, her tone careful, almost hesitant. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew what staying would mean. The line we had crossed wasn't just some fleeting moment of weakness, it was a point of no return. I don't know if I can," I whispered, though even as I said the words, I felt myself leaning toward her again. She nodded, understanding without judgment. "It's okay." Her fingers brushed mine once more before she let go. "No pressure. I don't want you to leave feeling like this was a mistake." I met her gaze, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw myself reflected in someone else's eyes, not as a wife or a professional, but as someone deserving of more than the roles she'd been given. A lump formed in my throat as I stood, grabbing my coat with shaky hands. "I need some time to think," I said, though I wasn't even sure what I was trying to think through. She walked me to the door, standing close enough that our arms brushed. "Take all the time you need," she murmured. "I'll be here." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The cool air outside hit my face as I stepped out, sharp and sobering. But even as I walked away from her apartment, the memory of her touch lingered like an unshakable echo. At home, the house was quiet except for the low hum of the television in the living room. My husband was half asleep on the couch, the soft glow of the screen casting shadows across his face. He stirred when he heard me come in, offering me a sleepy smile. "How was your night?" he asked, his voice thick with drowsiness. "Good," I replied, the lie slipping out too easily. I kissed his forehead, the gesture automatic but hollow. As I stood there, watching him drift back into sleep, I wondered how long I could pretend that everything was the same. Because deep down, I knew it wasn't. The morning light filtered through the windows, soft and golden, but it did nothing to quiet the storm in my chest. I sat at the kitchen counter, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The night before played in my mind like a reel I couldn't pause, her touch, the warmth of her breath, the way I felt like I had come undone and reassembled into someone new. My husband walked in, his hair mussed from sleep, and gave me that easy, familiar smile. "You're up early," he said as he poured himself a cup. "Couldn't sleep," I muttered. He raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Instead, he leaned down and kissed my cheek, the gesture soft and habitual. I forced a smile in return, though my mind was 1,000 miles away. Later that morning, as I scrolled through emails I had no interest in answering, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen. "Hey. I hope you're okay. I keep thinking about last night." My thumb hovered over the screen as I read and reread her message. The words felt like an echo of my own thoughts, aching, unsure, but so painfully real. I typed out a response, "Me too. I don't know what comes next." Her reply was almost instant. "Come over tonight. Let's talk. No pressure, just us." My breath caught in my throat. It was such a simple invitation, but it felt like the world tilted under my feet. The hours crawled by in excruciating slowness. I tried distracting myself with errands, folding laundry, cooking dinner too early. None of it worked. My nerves frayed with every passing minute. I changed outfits twice, eventually settling on a soft beige blouse and jeans, something casual but intentional. Underneath, though, I chose lace again. A small rebellion. A reminder of what I was hiding beneath the surface. By the time I was ready to leave, my husband was back home, flipping through TV channels. "Heading out again?" he asked, surprised but not suspicious. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone light. She wanted some company after the week she's had. "Just a quick catch-up." He nodded, already absorbed in whatever show was on. I hesitated at the door, guilt clinging to my skin like a second layer. But the pull toward her was stronger. Her apartment door opened before I even knocked. She must have been waiting on the other side. "Hey," she said softly. She looked different, like she hadn't slept much either. There was something raw in her expression that made my heart tighten. "Hey," I whispered back as I stepped inside. The air between us was heavy but not awkward. She led me to the couch where we had sat the night before, the wine glasses from yesterday still untouched on the table. For a while, we didn't speak. We sat close but not touching, the silence filled with everything we wanted to say but didn't know how. Eventually, she broke it. "I didn't sleep," she admitted, staring down at her hands. I kept replaying everything in my head. "Me too." Her eyes met mine, filled with questions and something else, fear, maybe. "Do you regret it?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. I swallowed hard. "No," I said finally. But I don't know what to do with it. She let out a breath that sounded like a half laugh, half sigh. Same. We sat in the quiet again, the city noise humming in the background. Then she reached out, her fingers brushing mine in that same, familiar way that sent electricity up my arm. It's like, I don't want to ruin your life, she said, her voice breaking slightly. But I don't want to lose you either. Her words cracked something inside me. My throat tightened as I fought the urge to cry. You're not ruining anything. I'm the one who's lost in my own life. She shifted closer until our shoulders pressed together. I just want you to be happy, even if it's messy. A bitter laugh escaped me. Happy. I don't even know what that means anymore. She reached for my cheek, turning my face gently toward her. Maybe it means letting yourself feel something real again. Her lips were so close that I could feel her breath. And this time, when she kissed me, I didn't feel like I was on the edge of something. I felt like I was diving straight into it. The kiss was slower, more deliberate than the first, like we were both trying to memorize every second of it. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a choice. When we pulled away, her eyes were glassy, but there was a quiet resolve in them. No matter what happens, you're not alone. I nodded, though my heart felt heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. By the time I got home, the sky was dark, and the house was quiet again. My husband's coat was slung over the chair, a familiar sight that felt oddly foreign now. He was at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I walked in, giving me that same soft smile, the one that used to feel like home. You okay? He asked, his brow furrowing slightly. Yeah, I whispered, setting down my keys. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore what okay even meant. The invitation came casually, wrapped in laughter and framed by the clink of glasses. Let's get out of the city this weekend, she said as she poured more wine into our glasses. Her eyes sparkled with something mischievous, but her tone stayed light. Just us. No work, no distractions. We need it. My first instinct was to say no. The practical voice in my head warned me that leaving for the weekend would raise too many questions at home. But then I remembered the tightness in my chest that never seemed to leave, the way I felt trapped between who I was and who I wanted to be. The idea of breathing different air, of being away from everything familiar, felt like salvation. I nodded slowly, a small, quiet rebellion. Okay. Let's do it. The drive to the cabin was a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The road stretched out in front of us, surrounded by trees whose leaves had begun to turn golden. The silence in the car wasn't uncomfortable, it felt like the calm before a storm. She tapped her fingers against the steering wheel to the rhythm of the music. Every now and then, she'd glance over at me, her smile small but genuine. Are you nervous? She asked, breaking the quiet. I hesitated before answering. Yes. Her smile softened. Me too. The cabin was tucked away in the woods, surrounded by towering pines that swayed gently in the cool breeze. The quiet was almost eerie after the constant hum of the city. The air smelled like pine and earth, fresh and sharp. We unpacked our bags in silence, the weight of the unspoken settling around us. The space was cozy, wood-paneled walls, a fireplace stacked with fresh logs, and windows that framed the fading orange sky. She lit a few candles, their soft glow filling the room with a comforting warmth. It's perfect, isn't it? She asked, her voice quiet but steady. I nodded, running my hand along the edge of the worn leather couch. Yeah. It is. That first night, we sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, our glasses of wine resting on the floor between us. We talked about everything and nothing, work stories, old memories, dreams we'd never told anyone. But beneath it all, there was a current of something deeper, something that both excited and terrified me. At some point, the conversation slowed, and we sat in the comfortable stillness, the crackling fire the only sound. She turned to me, her face illuminated by the flickering light. "I'm glad you're here." The simplicity of her words caught me off guard. My throat felt tight. "Me too," I whispered. She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, her fingers lingering at my cheek. My heart hammered in my chest as I felt the weight of her gaze. "I'm tired of pretending," she said softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. Her honesty unraveled something inside me. "So am I." She leaned in slowly, giving me time to stop her if I wanted to, but I didn't. Our lips met, and it felt like stepping into warmth after standing in the cold for too long. It was slow and tender, but beneath that tenderness was an ache that had been building for far too long. I closed my eyes and let myself fall into the moment, the warmth of her skin, the scent of her hair, the way her hand gently pressed against the small of my back. Time seemed to stop, the world beyond the cabin fading into nothingness. We spent the night talking and drifting into long stretches of silence where the only thing that mattered was her presence. But when the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, reality crept back in. I lay awake, watching the pale morning light touch the edges of the room. She was still asleep beside me, her face peaceful and relaxed. I wanted to stay there forever, suspended in that fragile bubble. But forever wasn't an option. We made breakfast together, eggs, toast, and coffee brewed in a worn-out French press. We moved around the small kitchen in perfect sync, the quiet intimacy of it making my chest ache. But as the day wore on, the questions I'd been avoiding began to resurface. What happens next? How do I go back? She noticed my silence and reached for my hand across the table. "You don't have to figure it all out today," she said gently. "We're allowed to just be here." Her words were meant to be comforting, but they only reminded me that this, whatever this was, had an expiration date. By the time the sun began to set, we knew it was time to leave. Packing up felt heavier than it should have, like we were boxing up more than just clothes and toothbrushes. The drive back was quieter than the drive up. We didn't need to fill the silence anymore. When we reached the city limits, the familiar sights felt jarring, almost surreal. She pulled up in front of my house, her fingers drumming nervously against the steering wheel. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tentative. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. Her hand brushed mine one last time. "Text me when you can." I gave her a small smile before stepping out of the car. The door closed behind me with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. My husband's car was in the driveway. The porch light was on. The sight of it all, the normalcy, the routine, felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. As I walked inside, the familiar scent of home washed over me, but it felt like stepping into someone else's life. He was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. He looked up and smiled. "Hey," he greeted, his voice warm and familiar. Perfect timing, dinner's almost ready. I forced a smile as I set down my bag. "Smells great." But as I leaned against the counter and watched him move around the kitchen, I wondered how long I could keep pretending. The days after the trip passed in slow motion, as if time had thickened and dragged me along with it. I went through the usual routines, breakfast with my husband, errands, work calls, but everything felt muted. The only thing that felt real was the memory of her, the warmth of her voice, the way her laughter felt like sunlight cutting through a heavy fog. Every time my phone buzzed, my pulse quickened. And when it wasn't her, disappointment settled in my chest like a stone. When it was her, though, the surge of anticipation was almost unbearable. "I miss you." That's all her text said one evening. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could I say that wouldn't feel like a lie? I missed her too. But it wasn't that simple. That night, I sat across from my husband at the dinner table. He was talking about his day, something about a project he was working on, but I couldn't focus. His voice became background noise, drowned out by the whirlpool in my mind. Finally, he noticed my silence and set down his fork. "You've been quiet lately," he said, concern flickering across his face. I blinked, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "Sorry," I murmured. "Just tired, I guess." He reached across the table and took my hand in his. "Is everything okay?" His touch was steady and familiar, but it felt like an anchor pulling me down rather than grounding me. I pulled my hand back gently and offered a weak smile. "Yeah. I promise." The lie felt bitter on my tongue. Later that night, after he had fallen asleep, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. My phone was on the nightstand, just within reach. The need to talk to her was overwhelming. Finally, I gave in. "I can't stop thinking about you," I typed and sent it before I could second-guess myself. Her reply came almost immediately. "Come over." The city streets were quiet as I drove through the night, the faint glow of street lamps casting long shadows on the road. My heart pounded in my chest, the anticipation and fear blending into something almost electric. When she opened the door, the sight of her unraveled me. She was barefoot, wearing an oversized sweater that draped off one shoulder. Her hair was loose, framing her face in soft waves. She didn't say anything, she didn't need to. Instead, she reached for my hand and pulled me inside, closing the door behind us. For a long moment, we stood there in the dimly lit hallway, the space between us heavy with everything we hadn't said. Then, without warning, I felt her arms around me, tight, desperate, like she was trying to hold me together. I clung to her just as tightly. The world outside her apartment didn't exist anymore. We sank onto the couch, the soft cushions enveloping us. She reached up and brushed a thumb across my cheek, her eyes searching mine. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice breaking. Her brow furrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I know I don't want to stop." My throat tightened as I tried to find the words to explain the chaos inside me. "It feels like I'm living two lives. And I'm scared I'll lose both." She exhaled slowly, resting her forehead against mine. "We'll figure it out," she murmured. "Even if it's messy. Even if it hurts. We'll figure it out." Her lips met mine, soft, searching, full of unspoken promises. It wasn't the same as the first time or even the second. This kiss felt heavier, like it carried the weight of everything we couldn't say out loud. When I finally pulled away, I felt raw, like a wound had been exposed to the air. "I should go," I whispered, though every part of me wanted to stay. She nodded, though her eyes glistened. "I get it." I stood and grabbed my coat, the fabric heavy in my hands. As I reached the door, she called after me. "Hey." I turned, my heart already aching. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. "Just, remember that." I managed a small, broken smile before stepping out into the cool night. The cold air stung my skin, but it couldn't numb what I felt inside. The house was dark when I returned home. My husband was asleep, his breathing steady and slow. I climbed into bed carefully, trying not to disturb him. But as I lay there, staring at the familiar shadows on the ceiling, I felt more alone than ever. Because the truth was no longer something I could bury beneath routine. Something had shifted inside me, something irreversible. And the scariest part wasn't the secret I was keeping. The scariest part was that I wasn't sure if I even wanted to go back to the life I'd had before. The day she came over felt different from the start. The kitchen still smelled faintly of morning coffee, but the counters were empty, save for a few forgotten vegetables and a half-empty carton of milk. The fridge looked as tired as I felt, bare, uninspired. As I stood there, staring at the cold shelves, a strange thought passed through my mind, like a whisper from somewhere distant. What if he felt that spark again, the kind that makes your whole face light up? But not because of me. The realization wasn't painful. It wasn't jealousy, either. It was curiosity. I wanted to see him feel alive again, to see that genuine, wide-eyed joy that once lit up our dinners when I surprised him with his favorite dishes. Would he close his eyes from the sheer pleasure of it? Would he laugh the way he used to? The idea settled into place, soft but persistent. And with it, her face came to mind, the one person I trusted to create magic out of nothing. She'd always had a way of turning the mundane into something extraordinary. I picked up the phone and texted her, "Can you come over? Bring your culinary wizardry. My kitchen needs a miracle." She arrived an hour later, carrying a canvas bag overflowing with ingredients I couldn't even name. Bottles of oil infused with herbs, spices that looked like they belonged in another century, vegetables so vibrant they almost didn't seem real. She set everything on the counter with an excited grin, brushing her hair out of her face. "You weren't kidding," she said, eyeing my sad fridge. "It's like a blank canvas in here." I laughed, already feeling lighter. "That's why I called the expert." She pulled out a cutting board and a chef's knife, her movements quick and sure. "All right, step back and prepare to be amazed." The kitchen came alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. The air filled with the scent of garlic sizzling in olive oil, the sharp citrus tang of lemons being zest, and the earthy warmth of cumin and coriander. My husband wandered in, drawn by the aroma. His eyebrows shot up as he took in the scene, the clutter of colorful ingredients, the hum of the stove, and the effortless way she commanded the space. "Wow," he said, his grin spreading as he leaned against the doorway. "What's going on in here?" She glanced over her shoulder, tossing a pinch of salt into the pan. "I'm saving dinner," she said with a wink. "And probably your taste buds." He laughed, a deep, unguarded laugh that I hadn't heard in too long. I watched him as he watched her, his eyes bright with curiosity and delight. There was no tension, no awkwardness. Just the simple joy of something new and unexpected. She plated the first dish, a vibrant stew with layers of color and texture, and set it in front of him with a playful flourish. "All right, taste and tell me if I've earned my reputation." He didn't need to be asked twice. He scooped up a spoonful and took a bite, his eyes closing as he savored it. When he opened them again, they sparkled with something childlike. "This is incredible," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "How do you make something this good out of thin air?" She laughed and shrugged. "Magic, obviously." He reached for a second helping without hesitation, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction bloom in my chest. I had brought them together here, orchestrated this moment, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. She caught my eye as she ladled more stew into his bowl and gave me a playful wink. "Didn't think it would be such a hit, huh?" I smiled back, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through me. It wasn't about the food. It wasn't even about her. It was about him. Watching him rediscover that unfiltered, unself-conscious joy reminded me why I'd called her in the first place. Sometimes, it isn't enough to be the one who creates the happiness, we just want to see it in the people we love, even if it comes from somewhere else. After dinner, the three of us lingered at the table, the remnants of the meal spread between us. My husband was still singing her praises, recounting the taste of every bite like he was describing the plot of a great novel. She waved him off with a laugh but looked pleased all the same. I sat back, sipping the last of my wine, letting the sound of their laughter fill the room. It should have felt strange. Instead, it felt like I'd given him something he didn't even know he was missing. As the evening wound down and she packed up her bag of magic ingredients, I walked her to the door. "Thanks for this," I whispered as I hugged her. I needed it more than I realized. She pulled back slightly, her eyes soft and searching. So did I, she said. For a moment, we stood there, caught in the quiet between what we'd shared and what we couldn't say. Then she smiled, a small, knowing smile, and walked out into the cool night. I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the sound of my husband still humming contentedly in the kitchen. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was living two separate lives. I felt like I was watching the pieces of my world shift, falling into place, or maybe falling apart. The days that followed felt like they belonged to someone else's life. The house was filled with the hum of routine, shared breakfasts, conversations about errands, the familiar sound of the front door closing when my husband left for work. But beneath the surface, everything felt fragile, like the faintest touch would shatter it all. I floated through my days, waiting for a sign, some kind of answer to the questions I hadn't even been brave enough to ask. One evening, my husband surprised me with a rare gesture, a date night. "You've been working so hard," he said as he handed me a simple bouquet of flowers, the paper wrapping crinkling under his fingers. "I thought we could use some time together. Just us." I forced a smile and took the bouquet, their scent sweet but almost cloying in my nose. "That sounds nice," I said, though my heart was far away, tangled in thoughts of her. I wore the dress he liked, the soft green one with a delicate neckline, and tried to lose myself in the idea of normalcy. We walked to the small restaurant around the corner, a place we hadn't visited in years but used to love. The lights were warm and low, the hum of conversation and soft clatter of silverware wrapping around us. He ordered a bottle of wine, and we settled into the familiar rhythm of small talk. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the weight pressing against my chest. He reached for my hand across the table. "I feel like I've been losing you lately," he said quietly, his thumb brushing against my knuckles. The words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed hard, searching for something to say that wouldn't be another lie. "I'm still here," I whispered. His brow furrowed, his eyes scanning my face like he was trying to read between the lines. "Are you?" The next day, she texted me. "I can't keep pretending that this is enough." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, the inevitable collision of the two worlds I'd tried so desperately to keep apart. That evening, after dinner, the doorbell rang. My husband looked up from his plate, confused. "Are we expecting someone?" I shook my head, already knowing who it was. I stood slowly, my legs trembling as I made my way to the door. When I opened it, there she was, standing on the porch with a small gift bag in hand. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything else fell away. She wasn't supposed to be here, not like this, not now. "I wanted to drop this off," she said, holding out the bag. Her voice was steady, but there was something vulnerable in her gaze. I took the bag, my fingers brushing against hers. "You didn't have to." She smiled faintly. "I wanted to." My husband's voice broke the moment. "Who is it?" I froze. Time seemed to splinter around me. This was it, the point of no return. I turned toward him, my throat tight. "It's my friend," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He walked to the door, offering her a polite but puzzled smile. "Oh, hey. Nice to finally meet you." She smiled back, but her eyes flickered toward me for a brief second. "Likewise." The tension was unbearable, a silent conversation happening between the three of us beneath the surface. "Well," she said, stepping back. "I should go." My husband nodded, oblivious to the storm raging between us. "Thanks for stopping by." I watched her walk down the steps, her silhouette bathed in the soft glow of the street lamp. The door closed with a soft click, but the weight of her presence lingered. Later that night, as I lay in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling, the faint sound of cars passing by outside. I felt the pull of everything I wanted and everything I was terrified to lose. When he reached for my hand in the dark, I didn't pull away. But I didn't hold on either. Because deep down, I knew the truth. There was no version of this where we all walked away unscathed. Somewhere out there, she was waiting. And here, in this quiet room, he was trying to hold on to someone who was already slipping away. And as I lay there, caught between two impossible choices, I felt the inevitability of it all settle in.